Hello and welcome to Archive West Texas on Classical 105.7. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson, joined as always today by our producer, Rachel Boyd. On this program, we talk with people who have shaped the history, culture, and business life of our region. We focus on their stories and accomplishments, but we also look for inspiration, lessons in leadership, service, perseverance, and community that can guide our next generation. We're pleased today to have Sam Law with us. Sam's a Lubbock native and a longtime businessman. If you've lived in Lubbock very long, chances are good your home has some mechanical or plumbing fixtures that were sold by Fields and Company, the family business led for decades by Sam's father, Dan Law. You may have played on one of Dan's Little League teams or attended a Texas Tech baseball game at Dan Law Field. Sam, welcome to Archive West Texas.
Thank you.
Let's talk about your family's origins. And this story starts not necessarily in Lubbock, Texas, but over in the eastern U.S. Your family.
My mom and dad grew up north of Montgomery, Alabama, about 30 minutes in a little town called Wetumpka. And they were the same age, grew up, went to school together. Dad was in the country. Mom was in the city. Then as they went to school, my father went to University of Alabama on a football scholarship. Mom went to Auburn. And then my dad, who was very poor at the time, had a roommate named Bart Starr. And Bart's girlfriend went to Auburn with my mom. So on the weekends, my dad and Bart would hustle over to see the girls at Auburn. And then, because Bart had a car, then go back to Alabama that night at the end of their dates. And they stayed there for 2.5 years. The Korean War started. Dad was pulled into the Korean War and had to go to Fort Riley, Kansas. So before he left, he and Mom got married, moved to Kansas. While Dad was in the Army in Kansas, there was a gentleman there who was in charge of football on the base, who was coming to Texas Tech after his time there to help coach DeWitt Weaver here at Tech. And he said, Dan, why don't you follow me to Lubbock and we'll see if we can't find a little scholarship money for you and find Gene a job. So Mom and Dad did come to Lubbock with no intentions of coming here, came here. Mom got a teaching job at Jackson Elementary. Dad was playing football and baseball. And then in the afternoons after practice, he got a job as a delivery boy for Homer G. Maxey, which was the plumbing company. And then as Dad graduated with school, they intended to go back to Alabama, but they stayed here. And then Dad worked himself up into the Homer Maxey Company, which turned into Fields and Company. And then we've just been here ever since. We ended up with 14 locations and 550 employees. So my father was a hard worker.
He was. Let's go back a little bit to the days of college roommates. For some of our listeners who might not know, Bart Starr turned out to be a pretty good football player, didn't he?
He did. Bart was unique in that he was the quarterback at Alabama, and he was the 18th round draft pick of the Green Bay Packers, and his coach was Vince Lombardi. And then Bart ended up being the MVP, I believe, for the first 2 Super Bowls. And when you and our families were very close, my dad and Bart ended up passing away within 30 days of each other, 29 days of each other. So they were close their whole lives. But when we would go up to Green Bay to watch a game and you were with Bart Starr, this was a kind of everybody got quiet when he walked into the restaurant and clapped and cheered. It was just fun to be up in Sheboygan or other Milwaukee, other places to where he was. And so it was fun to root for the Packers and, the Ice Bowl that was played against the Dallas Cowboys. And Bart slid across the goal line and won that. But, they were talking about how cold it was and how many guys got frostbite from that game and everything. So just unique life experience.
Back in the day, those guys were poor, scraping by football players. I think you told me one time they shared a sport coat.
They did. Bart had a gray suit. My father did not have a father around the house, but he had one of his older brothers had given him a blue suit. Bart had a gray suit, and Bart's dad had gotten Bart a car. So when they would get in the car after practice on Fridays to go see the girls at Auburn, sometimes Dad said, sometimes I had blue pants on with a gray coat. Sometimes I had blue coat on with gray pants. We just swapped and swapped and kind of mixed up the outfits and
made it work.
Fun days.
Tell our listeners a little bit about Homer Maxey and what that company was like when your father first went to work there.
The Homer Maxey company. Homer Maxey was a visionary really for Lubbock, Texas. And during that time, there was about 10 guys that were in Lubbock that were really visionaries as far as business. And Homer was one of them. Buck Cunningham was one of them for the impact that they made on West Texas. But Homer and his brothers had a plumbing supply business, had a lumber yard, had some other things. And then Homer had the ability to buy land, develop land, and then you would build the house with his brother's lumber. Then you would buy the plumbing supplies from Homer Maxey Company. And so you had everything kind of contained. Homer was extremely successful and then had the tables turned on him a little bit later in life. But when my father went to work for him, he and Mr. Maxey were just very, very close. And Homer took my dad under his wing and just really appreciated Dad. And Dad really appreciated Homer. And then Homer's daughters and children all grew up. And you had Carla, and then you had Glenna Goodacre and Carla Elliott. And from that, you had Jill Goodacre, and you had that family of that were all Homer Maxey's children and grandchildren. And he was very successful and had a very good business. Maxey Park, all the houses around that's all Homer Maxey.
How did H.G. Maxey Company transition to Fields and Company?
I'm not totally positive on my dates, but I'm pretty close. Around 1963, 64, Homer Maxey was ready to sell his business. He sold it to a gentleman named Lee Fields. And Lee lived in Lubbock, and they had locations in Amarillo and Wichita Falls and Lubbock. And then Lee ran that business, and he was a very good businessman too. And then when my father came to work for Homer, and then Lee ended up being the owner, then my dad was named president around that time, which was at the Christmas party of 1969. And so January 1 of 1970, my father was president, working with Alex Cook as well and working with Lee Fields. And so that was how that transition happened. And then, as we know, May 11th, 5 months later, we have a tornado here, literally right where we're sitting right now. And there were 3 tornadoes on the ground, and this was the Fields and Company was destroyed. And all this area where we're sitting now was all residential. And so we had 3 tornadoes on the ground at one time. The one that was right here was an F5. So we actually had pavement in part of our buildings where the roofs had collapsed and stuff.
Let's talk a little bit about that storm and then your father's leadership in the 70s at Fields and Company. You referenced that. I remember your dad one time telling me a story of Mr. Fields said, got a call, 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night on May 11th, 1970. He said, you might have a little broken glass down at your store. So he put a broom in the back of his trunk and drove downtown and looked at the living center. It was just completely leveled and gone. And that was a spectacular facility for the time. Tell that story.
The Living Center showroom was a showroom for plumbing, appliances, lighting, and they had built this Living Center. There's a hotel there now right across the street close by from the Pancake House. And it was a round building, a very large round building, and it was all glass. All the walls were glass, the roof was glass, everything. So it was at night, it just really shone bright. There were some technical errors to it because we couldn't keep it cool and couldn't keep it warm because it was all glass and you didn't run ductwork that way.
But back in the day, it was an architectural marvel for West Texas.
It was, yeah. And that was Lee Fields. Lee had a real eye towards that. And for 5 months, it was beautiful. I remember going through there when I was little and just playing in the bathtubs and stuff and just watching. And then when the tornado came and we knew it, our family went across the street and stayed in the neighbor's storm cellar. My father and a gentleman named Cyril Reesner, who has Oberkamp here. Cyril worked with Dad at that time. And they came down. They came down to look at how bad the damage was. And I remember sitting in that storm shelter and Dad coming down and he says, "It's gone. It's all gone." And it literally was. And the roof of that living center, the glass part, had been lifted up and an 18-wheeler had been put inside and the roof was put back down. Of course, everything was shattered. And then the Fields and Company, the warehouse part where all the plumbing supplies were and the gas lines and everything, all of that was just rubble. And so the following morning, May the 12th, my father had some friends. Jerry Walker was one of them, who worked at a tractor supply store. Jerry came out and scraped the parking lot to where people could have access to come to Fields and Company. Dad had a former teammate at Texas Tech who worked for GTE. He came out that morning and put a telephone pole in the ground and hooked a phone line up. So we had the only phone working in downtown Lubbock that time. And city council ran from there for a little while. Jim Granberry was mayor, and they ran their meetings from there for a while. We had folding tables set out, and plumbers would come, and heat and air conditioning people would come and pick through the rubble on what they needed for the job they're working on, go back, sign a piece of paper for what they took, and then go. And every single person who got, that's how it worked until we got everything organized. And then first supermarkets at that time came out and heard what was happening. They came out and put a truck out there and they made sandwiches. And so a plumber could come pick up fittings or a heat and air conditioner, pick up what parts they needed, sign a piece of paper, pick up a sandwich and a soft drink, and go off and keep working. And that's unified Lubbock and helped Lubbock come back, and it was just a thing of beauty.
Yeah, it was a horrible storm, but what you're describing is the true essence of community.
Well, it reinvigorated Lubbock.
It did.
It really invigorated Lubbock. So
absolutely did. Let's talk about your dad's leadership at Fields and Company. You've got one location in Lubbock, I guess, when this happened, or maybe you had one. I
had one in Amarillo, had one in Lubbock at that time. And then after that, one was put in Wichita Falls for a little bit, but it was purchased. So when Lee Fields passed, my father and Alex Cook, who was a wonderful man, bought Lee out, and we had a partnership with the Cook family, and it was a very good partnership. And we grew the business through West Texas and then eastern New Mexico and then up into parts of Oklahoma. And then after a few years, we bought the Cook family out, and then we started expanding. This is late 70s, early 80s. And then we started expanding. We ended up with 12 locations plus a master warehouse. So really 14 locations and 550 employees. We went from Albuquerque to Mobile. That's where we went. And we were carrying plumbing, heating, air conditioning, lights, appliances. And all of that was led by my father. And of course, we had great banking relationships with people who cared and stayed with us, and great customers who supported us, and loyal people and loyal friends. And it was just a really unique time.
What were the characteristics that your dad had? Talk with us about the characteristics that he had that allowed him to achieve such success in the business.
One of the things that my father was very good at was face-to-face people conversations. And he was a firm believer, and raised us to be the firm believers, to speak to people, be outgoing, be nice, and always tell the truth. My father was, go to bed early, Sam, get up early. And that was it, and put a full day in. And I can see many days where we wake up and we're having breakfast and he's gone already. And it's 7 o'clock in the morning. He's already gone and they're working. And then you're sitting there at night and he's coming in and it's dark. So they worked hard. They put full days in. His work ethic was what I learned from him. And to be honest is what we also spoke. And then I have a sister, I had an older brother, have a younger brother. And we were all taught to speak first, be friendly, welcome people, look them in the eye. And that's the characteristics my father had. It was just work hard, be honest, and put a full day's work in.
Talk a little bit about your mom.
Okay.
How did she compliment your father? How did she support him? I know she was an incredible person in her own right.
Yeah, Mom, Jean. Mom and Dad met in the 5th grade. And Jean, my mom, she was very much a faith-driven person and very much a church member person. Her passion was missions and supporting missionaries around the world, as was your mom, Gordon, as is your mom. And there was a group of ladies there. Mom loved missions and loved supporting missionaries, but she also supported my dad. And there were many times where we would have the head of major corporations in America come to Lubbock, Texas. And a lot of those meals, sometimes you see people, they go out to a steakhouse or something like that for those business meetings. Every one of those meetings with the presidents and the CEOs of major corporations, all of them ate at our house, and my mom cooked dinner. And we had quail and homemade biscuits and all the things. And it just made it a lot different when you have the head guys and they're eating at our house. It relaxes things. It makes the people part of it stronger. And my mom was very supportive of my father's business, and they complemented each other very, very well.
Your dad was well known as a Little League coach and very active in youth sports across the community. What are some of the best stories you remember about his leadership of young people in Little League and other youth sports?
You know, he did, and he coached all of them. He coached Dee's teams, he coached my teams, he coached Tom's teams. Had a lot of people go through Lubbock that got to play on my father's team. My father was very pro young man, helping them grow, helping them understand and believing in them, sharing confidence. Taught us to play hard, taught you to practice hard. And at the end of every practice, we had a soft drink or Gatorade or something where we sat down just as guys and just talked and learned about each other. Just a really bonding. So many, when my father did pass, so many ex-players from Pee-wees to majors to Colt League. I got so many wonderful letters about Coach, which were wonderful. And then many times I saw Dad when we'd have a really long practice. I see him come home, shower, and go back to the office at night. So he had stopped his daytime work to come coach and then and go back to work. I saw that my whole life. Yeah.
What's the funniest thing you ever saw on a baseball field that involved your father?
Well, had a mother of one of the players on the other team get upset and come at the umpire who was coaching the game, and she'd come out on the field and she was really upset. She yelled over to my father something, "Dan, do you think that was a right call?" And Dan goes, "Let's do that pitch over again." "What do you say, ump? Let's just do it." Because it was Little League at that time.
Yeah.
And it calmed her down, and she got to go back and start that pitch over, and the little boy got a hit, and there you go. And so it was positive for, defusing a situation that could have gone sour.
Yeah. Kinda. Sam, the Law family's tied really closely to Texas Tech. What did Tech mean to your family and your father?
Well, it meant a lot to my mom and dad. Mom graduated from Auburn University. Dad graduated from Texas Tech. But Dad, there was a need in Lubbock at that time for good support of Texas Tech. Texas Tech was not a new school, but not a strong school yet at that time. It needed support in a lot of areas. And my dad being able to get his education from there, and our proximity to our family business's proximity to Tech campus helped make things easier. We supported Tech in a lot of areas. A lot of athletes worked summer jobs at the warehouse. There's a lot of libraries that were built on campus. There's a lot of ticket offices and a lot of other facilities that were built throughout there that our families were involved with, as were other people, but our families were very involved with. So his love for just helping Texas Tech, who helped him, was inspirational to him, and he manifested that by giving back to the university.
It seems like in the current environment in collegiate athletics, there are billionaires everywhere writing massive checks. back in the day when your father was supporting Tech, there wasn't a lot of that kind of money floating around. And
No.
and your dad stepped up many times when my takeaway was that very few other people could or would. Tell us how the baseball field came to be named Dan Law Field.
Yeah, it was a short conversation. I say short in what you would think a conversation was. T. Jones called, and he and Laurel Kovasis called to visit with Dad. And I was in the warehouse at the time, working in the warehouse, still in college. And Dad said, come in here. I want you to listen to this meeting. And we were sitting there, and Laurel Kovasis and Dad went to Tech together. And then T. Jones was athletic director. And they came in and pleasantries. And then T started talking about Title IX had just been passed. And the Tech was going to have to make some real decisions to get scholarships in line with the new requirements. One of the things he shared, he said, for instance, SMU is turning off their baseball program, and they're going to keep their swimming program. And T goes, I don't want to do that. I want to keep the baseball program. So we've got to make some decisions, but we don't have the baseball facilities. And what I would like to talk to you, Dan, about, and he started sharing just a little bit of his vision. And Dad said, hang on, T. And Dad picked up what was going on. He goes, you and Laurel, y'all get out there and run that university, and I'll get that baseball field built. It's a 7-minute conversation, start to stop, and at that point in. And then I ran back over 2 days later and got the rough draft of which direction the field was going to face now, because we're putting home plate in left field, what it used to be, and some other directions. And we started talking about, from the very basics, set in meetings with sprinkler systems and lighting and home plate and the field and leveling. And, there's all the meetings of wind direction and what that would do to the game. And it just lots of that. And then through all of that, Dad gave a lot. Our family gave a lot. And then he also inspired other people to give a lot. So it wasn't just my dad. There was a lot of other people involved. And it was wonderful. And then when they announced it, I think 83 or 84, and T surprised the family, because we had not said anything. We gave because we love Texas Tech. And then for T to surprise my father that night with the naming of Dan Law Field, felt good.
Well, yeah, well deserved,
yeah,
well earned.
Yeah, and there weren't a lot that did that. There's many times that John Conley would call and say, "Hey, Dan, we've got a football game against USC this Saturday, and it's on ABC TV, and we need a sellout, and we're 10,000 short." And Dad goes, "It's a sellout." And then he'd call me, run, get the tickets. I'd go see Becky at the ticket office. I'd come back with a box full of tickets. We got to start handing these out to customers and to architects and builders, because we had just bought section 8, 9, 10, and 11, and then you could sit on the grass at that time too. And then we'd just pay one fee for the whole grass. And, then all of a sudden the camera comes on Saturday and it's a sellout from Lubbock. And it's just that. And that happened over and over and over. So we just love Texas Tech, as does a lot of people in West Texas. And we're fortunate to have the new guys who do have all the money, who care that much. I mean, look how fortunate we are to have those guys who love Texas Tech as much as others, yet have resources, and they give them.
Absolutely true. But I think about your dad. I think about Jerry Walker. I think about Junior Arterburn. I think about these guys in the 50s walking into a facility and, concrete shower. I mean, maybe a locker, maybe not.
Yeah.
And the success that, I'm going to call it an industry, has become, stand squarely on the shoulders of these guys that came in place. Yeah, put it in place. Yeah. And I often wonder, what would those guys think if they walked into Tech and looked at what we've got going now?
Yeah. Yeah. It is different out there now, and it is beautiful. And
it is, absolutely.
There'll be guys that come years from now that add to what's being put now and take it on to the next level. And everything builds on each other, and just keep going,
How hard was it for your family to decide to sell Fields and Company?
Yeah, it was difficult. Difficult because we had lots of family members in it, and we had many people, teammates, that had 35 plus years working there. So you had their families and their children and all that. And then you had new families in Albuquerque and El Paso and Oklahoma City and Birmingham and Mobile. You just had lots of good family relationships and lots of a solid business. And the company that purchased us came out of England. It was a holding company out of England, and they were expanding across the nation. And when that proposal came to us, there was a financial part of the decision that was very pleasant. There was a human part of the equation that was very, very difficult. Even after you sold, that human equation was still very difficult. But we're fortunate, very fortunate.
Looking back, what are you most proud of in your family's legacy?
Family of faith, family of hard work. I was blessed to have a father who taught me how to get up early and go to bed late and put a full day in, son. And I had a mom who taught me how to love missions and love missionaries. And so we had a perfect complement in our house. I never, ever saw my mom and dad have an argument. They loved each other. Dad was a wonderful businessman, and Mama was a very strong Christian in her faith. And that's the tutelage of what we grew up under. And we're just very fortunate.
What's next for Sam Law?
Well, right now we're working in the investment arena, where I'm a financial advisor with a specialist in the 401k arena. And we have customers in almost every city that I did, because I went to a lot of friends from Albuquerque to Mobile and all of Texas. And we're just going to keep working and try to break even. That's what we're going to keep trying to do.
A lot of us trying to do that.
Yeah.
Sam, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you taking time to share your story with our listeners. Thanks to each of you for listening. If you know somebody whose story we should share, please email us at info@classical1057.org. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Archive West Texas.